everyone. I just want to say first off, thank you for coming. Hopefully this is going to be a nice evening. You can watch the documentary and have a chat, and at the end, hopefully there'll be time for some questions as well. We've got three really wonderful panel speakers who are doing lots for survivors in Leeds. So it'll be really nice to hear from them and what they do and kind of their opinions on current events and things like that. So first off, my name's Neve. I work at Survivors West Yorkshire, which is a charity that provides free counselling for male survivors. I also co-founded Sasha Society, which is Survivors Against Sexual Harassment, Students Against Sexual Harassment and Assault. I co-founded that in 2021 with my really great friend Chloe, who unfortunately couldn't be with us tonight. Sasha Society is a society at the University of Leeds. It functions as a kind of community for survivors, but they also campaign and work with the university to make campus safer. We also have Katie, who is from Sarsville. She's been an activist in the movement against sexual violence and abuse for the past 20 years. During the 16 Days of Action 2008, she co-founded Support After Rape and Sexual Violence Leeds, which is Sarsville, and in 2021 she returned as its first CEO. Katie was previously the national spokesperson for Rape Crisis England and Wales. Sarsville is the dedicated rape crisis centre for all women and girls in Leeds affected by rape and sexual violence, and they run a helpline, counselling and advocacy services. So we're really lucky to have Katie here. I don't know if there's anything you'd like to add or just say hi. We're also joined by Liv and Lauren, who are the current president and welfare committee members at Sasha. They've been instrumental in Sasha's success, and it's been really great to just see Sasha grow, especially over just this first semester, and they're just brilliant. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from them later as well. I'd just like to mention as well that Lauren is an incredibly talented artist, and she likes to intertwine her creativity with her activism, and has held two incredibly powerful exhibitions over the past kind of year. So I'd really check out her work because she's phenomenal. So tonight we're going to watch Undercover Sexual Harassment, The Truth, where journalist Ellie Flynn goes undercover to expose the reality of sexual harassment that's perpetrated against women and girls in Britain. It is quite a hard-hitting documentary, but it covers some very important topics. So I'd just like to say a quick trigger warning, because she's exposing sexual harassment in real time. So if anyone needs to kind of drop out, they're more than welcome to just join for the panel discussion, like if things get too overwhelming. So just kind of put yourself first, but it is a very, very good documentary, and a good watch. So yeah, without further ado, we'll watch the documentary. Okay, so hi everyone again. I think firstly, I'd just like to ask each of the panel members for kind of initial reflections on the documentary and the issues it raises. I think for me, like watching it, I'm so glad that someone has had the courage to kind of show what it is like in real time. I think it's something that we've needed to see for so long, as awful as it is to watch. It's kind of, it really shows the issue. There's no way to kind of deny that it's happening because you see it happen. So I think it's such a great documentary for that. But if anyone else would like to offer kind of a reflection, if we want to start with Liv.
Yeah, Neve, I agree. I think it really reinforces like a need for change, and as she said at the end, it's everyone's issue. At Sasha, like we work a lot on in terms of sexual education and education reform in general, and I think she really addressed the fact that there is a need for reform in terms of consent and prevention and awareness, and just awareness of sexual violence and sexual harassment as it happens, not just in terms of sexual harassment of women, but sexual violence as it happens to everyone. So I think that was really important.
Yeah. Katie, do you have anything to add?
It was so slow unmuting me, I remuted myself in my impatience. Sorry. Yeah, I agree. I think the presenter was incredibly courageous in making this documentary, and there was clearly a need for it. And that focus group of men at the end and their shock really illustrated that so well. I think, right from the beginning of the documentary, when individuals were sort of vox popped on the street and interviewed about their own experiences throughout their whole lives, from being very young girls to much older women, of sexual harassment, sexual violence and assault, really kind of summarized really well the absolute prevalence of sexual violence and abuse, and what an almost universal experience it is, particularly for women and girls. And whilst every single story was really moving and quite shocking, and there were times during particularly the undercover operation where I felt very nervous and very kind of sick and stressed, and and the trauma, the young girls in the classroom, for example, it really came through how traumatizing their individual experiences had been. And yet, I think, sadly, whilst all of that was really shocking and really depressing, the most shocking thing for me about the documentary was not the prevalence, because as a woman, obviously, I work in this field, and I've worked in this field for 20 years, as you said, but I think instinctively most women and girls, whether they work in this area or not, know that that is the universal, the common experience. So that is not the part of it that's shocking. The bit that was most surprising to me was that that group of men, quite a diverse room full of men, didn't know, and that they needed to see that to be like, oh, that explains why women are so untrusting. and that was the thing most surprising and most fascinating to me, because I feel like we talk about it all the time, and yet clearly the message is not getting through.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I just think I don't know if it's when you kind of are working in the sector or you do a lot of activism with sexual violence, it's like you feel like everyone has the same view as you, like everyone knows about it. It's like you get in almost like an echo chamber of like, oh yeah, people know about this issue, and then when you see that people don't, and even with that, it's the fact that they had to physically see something happen to actually even kind of believe that it happens. It is shocking, and it's quite upsetting to watch, really. Lauren, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I really agree with what Katie said there, and I think that sort of endpoint of the documentary is so standout, because it shows the whole purpose of the documentary is to open up these conversations. And like Katie said, watching it, it was sort of framed itself as this really hard-hitting and shocking commentary. And I think that the experiences, I mean, probably especially for us in our line of work as well, but they weren't necessarily shocking, and the most shocking part was them not knowing. And I think that with the stuff that we've been doing with Sasha at the moment has really emphasized the importance of bystander training, and these men and people who aren't familiar to these experiences holding themselves accountable, because I think that in a way, that it was the most shocking part, that they were shocked.
Yeah, definitely. I think one thing that she kind of touches on at the start of the documentary is kind of the intimate image abuse and cyber flashing and things like that. So it kind of got me thinking to how it's changed for women over time. I don't know if this is something maybe Katie could speak to, having been in the sector for so long. Like, how do you think the dangers facing women have changed?
Sorry, that's taking ages. I smiled, not because you said I've been in the sector for so long, but because you said that and avoided saying that I remember a time before social media and the internet, which I do. Thank you for that, but I'll say it. So because I think it is, you know, it is really pertinent. When I worked in that spokesperson role for Rape Crisis England and Wales, I would often find myself saying, you know, these issues and experiences are not new. And again, that was reflected in the age range of some of the women interviewed in the documentary from the beginning. Obviously, there was quite a focus on the younger woman's experience, and the main presenter was a younger woman. But you know, all of us at all different stages of life, I think, have experiences that we can point to from, you know, throughout our kind of life stages. And that means that and obviously that kind of rings true because we know that, you know, patriarchy is the system in which we've lived for many centuries. So that isn't, it's not surprising that the kind of ubiquity of these experiences is there for women and girls. But I think what the internet has done and what the phenomenon of having the internet in your pocket has done, which it's important to remember is a relatively new thing. I mean, you know, the internet is relatively new, but smartphones certainly, social media that everybody is on certainly, and what it's provided is another weapon, for want of a better word, or another tool in the arsenal or the toolbox of the perpetrator. And you know, men, and it is, you know, predominantly men, not only men, but men who choose to perpetrate violence against women and girls, and sexual violence and abuse of all different kinds. So it enables faster access to a wider number of potential victims. So, you know, there are lots of positive things about the internet and social media and our smartphones, and lots of ways in which people can and are utilizing those tools for security as well, and also for solidarity, you know, for online, for support, for creating communities of survivors, for activism. So there's loads that's positive about those things too. You know, we can also use those tools in fighting the white supremacist heteropatriarchy, but you know, we can't deny that if that tool is out there, then these perpetrators who have always existed are going to use those tools. And as a result, we have seen these new forms of sexual violence and abuse, and specifically this image-based sexual violence and abuse, you know, become so widespread.
Yeah, I completely agree that because social media has opened up so many doors in a positive way, like communities can get together and you can organize things online. I mean, this is all online, so it can be used for good, but I think the danger with it as well is that it's not in person, it's not personal, so people don't think it's actually kind of assault or a violation because it's just on a phone screen. But in a way, it's almost more kind of invasive because that's still your personal space. And I think a lot of people don't even recognize that is some, like, that if someone is sending you a picture that you haven't asked for, like, that is a form of sexual violence. And I think that's one of the issues with kind of online spaces, is this kind of, you just get into someone's kind of personal space without having to be in a physical space with them, if that makes sense. I don't know if Liv or Lauren, you have anything to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to say I completely agree with what Katie was saying. It has, like, social media, the internet, everything has completely facilitated you know, the use of microaggressions, cyber attacks, everything like that. It's becoming, increasingly easier to create vulnerable spaces for like everyone, and using technology to harass others without consequences, without real world consequences, is increasingly facilitated. In addition to that, I think also social media has normalized and desensitized a lot of us to these issues. I believe it was something like 76% of girls between the ages of 12 and 18 had been sent nude images, unsolicited nude images. And I can't remember the percentage of how many thought that that was just kind of a common occurrence. But I know, you know, from personal just speaking to other women, that we all kind of believe that it is. And there's no real world consequences, as you were saying, Eve, to you know, people doing that. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that in a way there's a lot of specific issues with technology in terms of I think people can feel more anonymous, and just to relate it to a specific platform, I guess with Snapchat, people can send these explicit images and then they disappear. And yeah, and like you mentioned, Neve, there's not that kind of physicalness with it. And something which I was looking into recently as well was this instance in Leeds where somebody was filming women with a GoPro on nights out. And I think something which was really, really disgusting about it was the comments that had been left on the YouTube video, and the way that people felt that they could leave these inappropriate, horrible comments. And like we were saying as well, with this technology of the, like I was saying, the technology of the GoPro, they were able to feel quite, you know, they were anonymous. They have been found out now, actually, which is very good. But yeah, they had this little camera and they could use this technology to film people and get these explicit images. And yeah, I think there is that sense as well that we can use technology to our benefit. A new app called Walk Safe, if you haven't heard of it, is a great scheme where you can record yourself walking and from one destination to another and send it to trusted people, and you can find trusted routes, etc. And there's an SOS button. But yeah, I think it is quite scary, this mass amount of technology that gives these people another platform and a way to harass and assault people.
Yeah, I think it becomes very kind of scary, because I think social media is something that not many of us really have that much control over. And like with anonymized kind of profiles and stuff, people do get away with saying things and doing things, behaving in such inappropriate ways. And I think, I mean, at this point, I don't know, I'll kind of propose a question to you. But do you think there is a way that we can combat kind of online sexual violence and abuse? I mean, like the videos with the GoPro, I guess when people started to highlight the issue with that, and clearly someone's been found behind that account, like, is there a way that you feel that we can kind of combat these issues? If anyone wants to jump in.
I just wanted to say that the desensitization point, I agreed very much with what both Liv and Lauren and you, Neve, had to say, but that desensitization point, I think, is really, really poignant. And also the idea that we've been, I think there are certain kinds of men who hold hateful, misogynistic, violent views, who've been quite emboldened, you know, in the same way that we as survivors or activists can find communities online. They've also found their communities online, and I'm not even going to mention, you know, particular high profile examples of that, because they don't deserve it. But yeah, I think, you know, that those are really important. In terms of how we start to tackle these issues, I think there are, as with anything, there's different levels and layers. So there are practical things like regulation and holding the actual platforms, and, you know, there's people who, let's not forget, make big money out of social media, accountable, because if they have the technology to create these incredible these incredible services, then they certainly have the technology to make them safer, to regulate them, to apply sort of zero tolerance policies to those who misuse and abuse them. So there's that sort of practical level. There's also, I think what Laura might have been describing with the GoPro thing, it sounds like that offender was identified because people who wanted to effectively intervene, not be passive bystanders, helped to identify that person online, and we can also do that, harness the same technologies that offenders are using against them. But ultimately, I think the only thing that really is going to tackle this complete kind of wave of I used to call violence against women and girls a pandemic, and then pandemic means something so different to us now, but it is a huge tidal wave, a massive global issue, and really the only way that we can tackle it are the kinds of things that you've all mentioned already, is tackling the root causes of these kinds of behaviors, the attitudes that have objectified and dehumanized women and girls and othered women and girls in the eyes of certain men and boys to such an extent that they have no empathy or understanding. I think it's very easy when we have these conversations, because they're necessarily so gendered, to suggest that to sound very much like we are attacking men or men and boys. And the presenter herself said, I know this is not the majority of men who do this, but actually I think it's quite useful to see the enemy, if you like, and there kind of is one in this situation, not as men, but as patriarchy, the system that creates these attitudes, and that accepts them and normalizes them and allows them to happen. So everything from those who are actually out there waiting around for women that they perceive to be vulnerable to then rape, which is completely outrageous and shocking, but right through to the uniformed police officers and others who were just standing around and allowing those behaviors to happen. So obviously that kind of systemic change is not going to happen overnight, and many of us have been working on it for years or decades individually, and sometimes it can feel very frustrating because you feel like you're not getting anywhere. But all that we can do is keep chipping away at it to create that change from the grassroots up, and that includes education, education in school settings, education in young person settings outside of school, and of course education and awareness raising among adults who have taken these views into the adult world with them.
Yeah, definitely. Education is a massive one for me. I feel like it's the root of, it's the way to uproot all of the issues by just getting the education in young. And it's my personal opinion that I think that kids should be learning about consent from a young age, even not necessarily sexual consent, but just consent about their autonomy and like what is right and okay, and that you are allowed to say no. And I think that is education is kind of the most powerful way to dismantle these kind of systemic and institutionalized beliefs, and really kind of beat down the patriarchy. I don't know if Liv and Lauren have anything that they want to add to that.
Yeah, actually, in terms of the education side of things and consent training, I think you mentioned it being really important, not just sexually, for this consent to be taught. And when we run consent training, our first scenario is about two children, and one of them asking to hug the other, and that being consent. And I think that if we really break it down, and children are taught this from a young age, and taught, if you want to hug your friend, ask them, then it will be sort of more rooted in us. And I think relating that to sex education as well, there's so much reforming to do there, because I think, I mean, everyone has sort of different experiences of sex ed, but mine was that sex is for, you know, producing a child, and it was very taboo. And I think at a suitable age we should be taught that pleasure is meant for both men and women, because I think that sort of equality in sex really ties into a lot of these issues with women being assaulted and harassed, because there is this sort of patriarchal understanding that sex is meant for men. And so I think that if we begin to tackle these issues in education and just talk about consent in all of its layers and in all these different scenarios from a young age, it would over time really help to change these issues.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in there. I completely agree with everything said. Obviously that's the point. But for those who like obviously won't agree in different spaces to the ones that we're in, I think the key thing that Katie was saying as well is taking accountability. And as students, that for us means making sure that the university is implementing preventative measures, which I don't think is spoken about enough. You know, we have all the welfare measures, we're a welfare society ourselves, but to take responsibility, be active bystanders, as Lauren was saying, and, you know, start with a bottom-up approach rather than top-down, reforming education. There's a lot of mistrust in police officers, as we saw in that documentary. There wasn't much intervention, and where it's safe to do so, I think it's really important that we do intervene. And part of that, you know, it doesn't have to be anything dramatic. It can literally just be teaching your children about consent, teaching your friends about consent, making sure that your friends are behaving appropriately on nights out, for example. Anything like that, that's all accountability. And because this is such a sort of socially constructed issue, using accountability, I feel like we can dismantle the system that we currently have, and sort of implement trust and implement I know Rob and I often talk about like radical empathy. We've spoken about that at the puppetry thing we did. Just implementing, you know, behaviors of radical empathy, and that behavioral change is going to make massive change across society.
Yeah, definitely. I think, like Katie said before as well, it's about chipping away. And if anyone was here last night, I kind of said an analogy about how it's like a big ball, and it feels like there's so many issues, but sometimes you have to just chip away in your section. And once everyone starts chipping away, we'll get to the core of it. But I don't know, is there anything, did you want to jump in, Katie?
Yeah, just one thing that each of you have said kind of sparked a thought, and you know what you're saying about chipping away. I just wanted to use the kind of well-worn quotes that we've got to be the change. You know, we've got to be the change that we want to see in the world. And so sometimes, although it feels massive, if every single person thinks, well, I'm only me, I'm only one person, then of course nothing will ever change. But if every single person thinks, I will do what I can do in my own life, then everything will change. And I think that, not everybody is going to take to the streets. Not everybody is going to deliver brilliant consent training. But sort of sparking off what Liv was saying about accountability and radical empathy, which I think one way in which men can intervene and not be bystanders is not necessarily, it doesn't necessarily have to be that being a big hero, and jumping in those scenarios. I would hope that in those scenarios, when people see things like that happening, they would try to safely intervene. But I think a big issue is how men behave when there are no women present in the, in communities of other men. Because I think you could see in that focus group at the end of the documentary that the men were talking to each other, but they were also very conscious the presenter's presence, and you know, and of what they knew that they were meant to say. But you know, I know through talking to male friends and other documentaries and resources that I've read through the years, that there, you know, there can be a culture of jokes, making jokes which are inherently sexist or misogynistic. And actually, there can be a lot of men in the room when a joke like that is made who feel really uncomfortable, don't agree with it, don't find it funny. But unless they say they don't find it funny and it's not okay, those 2 or 3 men in that big room who actually, not necessarily even the person who's made the joke, but a couple of people who hear that joke will think to themselves, oh, that's how it really is, because it will affirm their actual views about women and girls. And unless you challenge and let other men know that actually that's not how you think and you don't find that funny, then things will never change. So I think that's an important part of intervening and being an active bystander. And then just the final thing I was going to say about Lauren talking about consent from the earliest possible age, I completely agree with that. And I would just say, you know, if there's anyone in the audience who is you know, a parent, or like me, an auntie, a step parent, I'm also a step grandma, we have to be really mindful. Like the way I was brought up was, oh, go and give Uncle so and so a hug. And so it's not just about teaching kids about those interactions with each other, which are vitally important, but it's about not giving them those messages in their daily lives and their family lives, that they owe adults physical contact or affection, and teaching them that it is okay for them to say no and that that's not rude is vitally important.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I remember my aunties chasing my brother around because he would always try evade like kisses on the cheek and hugs and stuff. And then you think back and you think, no, well, he was in the right to run away from them. And I just think that is something that if I ever have kids, I will definitely implement. I think it's so important, because then once you know from the start, you know kind of your autonomy, you know you can say no, and that will feed into sexual experiences as you get older and stuff like that. I think what you were saying, Katie, kind of speaks to the way that patriarchy can actually be very harmful to men, because even though individually they might not agree with like misogynistic jokes that are said in that context, they don't feel comfortable enough to call out their friends because maybe they'll feel like othered, or they're too scared to kind of confront the other men in the group. And I think that is another kind of issue that needs to be highlighted, or just a point to make, is that men aren't the bad people. I think a lot of men kind of internalize sorry, let me think of the word. Like they feel very attacked when people say like things about men, and when you have discussions about rape culture, and I think they throw up a defense of like, well, I'm not like that, and that's where the kind of not all men has come from, because it's a defense. And I think that's in a way equally as big of an issue that needs to be kind of combated to put a stop to the violence that women and girls are experiencing.
And just to add on to that, Neve, I think as well, like men, we need to make men realize that they are also included in the conversation. Everyone is included in the conversation. Every single person, no matter their background, is part of this change and part of, you know, in some ways part of the issue. And I think as part of like what we do with Sasha, we're trying to be like consistently more inclusive, consistently trying to make sure that men in particular know that they are part of the conversation. And I think Lauren could probably speak more to this in terms of like the tea and chat that we do, and as she's the welfare officer, just speaking to a variety of different people. But one of our priorities at the moment is just making sure that men know that we are for them as well, they are included. I think that goes a long way in terms of the education and preventative measures that we endorse so much as well at university.
Yeah, I was just going to go back to something that Neve and Katie were saying, and then I'll mention the tea and chats and being inclusive. But I would say in terms of the active bystander conversation, it is kind of human nature to just conform and be passive when we're not aware of these issues, which is really a shame. But I think, I mean, we've probably all experienced this, but I've sort of sat at the freshers stall or sat at stalls and had people read Students Against Sexual Harassment and Assault, and then just sort of like walk away as if, you know, if I'm not involved with that, I'm not a problem, but I don't need to be involved with that. And in our active bystander training, we just really try to make sure that even us as a society and people, we hold ourselves accountable, and we try and sort of shift this sort of like the conversation to a blaming of men, and just these are ways you are not collectively the problem, but these are ways that you can understand the experiences of these victims and survivors, who are not all women but are predominantly women. And I think there's a scheme going on at the moment which is called Switch On for Women's Safety. I think that's including all survivors and victims, not only women. And what this training is doing is it's targeted at everyone, and it's saying that this safety is all of our responsibility, and it's ways for men who maybe do want to be active bystanders but aren't sure how. And for example, they may see a friend getting assaulted or harassed and turn to violence, or turn to trying to prevent this in a way which isn't very productive. And it's a way of training people to be active bystanders in a productive way, and preventing these things in ways that is comfortable for them, which I think is really important. And then what was the next thing? Tea and chats being inclusive. Yeah, so we I think it's so important at the university to be constantly considering how we can branch out and be more inclusive and make sure that everyone feels heard. And we do things like today, we had our tea and chat was about men's mental health for Movember. And yeah, just really ensuring that for our social media and the way that we present ourselves, we are a society that is inclusive for everyone. And yeah, we do a lot of things like making sure we've now got labels at our tea and chat, and we want people to know that they don't necessarily have to be involved in talking, they can just be there and have a safe space. But just while I'm talking about that, I do also think that with the action that we're taking, there is this constant balance between offering welfare and then this activism. And I think sometimes that can feel like quite a difficult thing, because through this activism and opening up these conversations, people may realize experiences they've had. And I think it is, yeah, just very important for us to make sure we're offering this safe space open to everyone as we open up these conversations simultaneously.
Yeah, I definitely agree. There's a difficult balance to kind of strike. But I also like speaking to kind of male experience working at Survivors West Yorkshire, which is obviously a male-centered service. I think even kind of shocked me when I started just how much of an issue this is for men as well as women. And it's very easy to kind of be like, this isn't a man's issue, when really it is, and a lot of men are silenced, and it's kind of how we even get through to those men as well to make them know that we're there for them as well, and the services for them, and they're not alone. There was something else I was going to say. I can't remember who brought it up, but the thing that kickstarted me into action was seeing a quote that said, if you're not actively trying to dismantle rape culture, you're participating in it. And up to that point, I'd kind of been like, I knew of things going on, and obviously had personal experiences, harassment and things like that. And I was just like, oh God, what do we do to stop this? And then I met Chloe and we started Sasha, and it's just developed and blossomed into this amazing society that I think is just going to keep growing and growing. It's so lovely to see. So, I mean, to anyone watching as well, if you ever feel kind of that you're not doing enough, I just think doing little things like social media is a good tool to utilize, sharing things, speaking your own truth if you feel confident enough to do that. And like Sarsville runs a helpline that people can volunteer with if you have the time to give up, to kind of dedicate to this cause. It really is like small actions that I think anything you do to kind of dismantle it is something. It doesn't matter if you're the CEO of a rape crisis charity, or you work for a charity, or you run a society, or you just share posts on social media, or you talk to your friends, or you step in when you see that's something that's happened. Like every little action makes a difference. I think we've kind of talked about this a little bit through the discussion so far, but how do you think that we combat the issues highlighted in the documentary? Is there anything you feel needs changing in the approach to sexual violence and harassment in combating it? Or do you think, like, is there anything that sticks out to you that you think this needs to change now? I don't know if any of you have anything to answer with. It's quite a big question.
I would say a big one that I think me and Liv especially have been working on at the moment is trying to make consent training compulsory at university. I think that is something that's really important because I mean, it's been made compulsory now for Premier League football, and I think that these little steps of just having these conversations in these groups and societies, and making sure that it's not something which is just taboo and not spoken about is so important. I think there's such an emphasis on training for me in terms of even I'll give the example of bouncers and in Leeds, and I think not just in Leeds though, but just my experience in Leeds and nationwide, I think bouncers are trained. Their purpose is to keep people safe for me, and to make people, ensure people are safe in these venues. But there's so many examples of people being vulnerable, but they're not on the venue site, so they're neglected. And bouncers trained through to respond with aggressive behavior, and I just think if we reformed this training and the tools that we are given to deal with these sorts of issues, also, for example, the Ask for Angela scheme, something which was really enlightening to me was meeting with the project leader and discussing the fact that although we have these great schemes in place, there is no training for bar and staff members, or these hospitality workers. So just I think that's something specifically important, is this training across these whole range of venues and individuals, and just for everyone, which might help.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, and I think one thing that we've not really spoken about so far, which I'm in many ways like really refreshed by, is the criminal justice system. And we did mention the police officers that were featured in that documentary, but I think it was clear through many of the interviewees in the documentary, and certainly through our experience at Sarsville, and what we know in terms of national statistics, that the majority of women and girls who are experiencing these forms of really very serious sexual violence are not reporting it to the police, and when they do, the process takes too long, is too often re-traumatizing. There's a lack of resource for specialist independent sexual violence advocates, which is again one of the services that Sarsville provides, and that lots of specialist charities and organisations across the country provide, but which we struggle to fund to be able to meet the full need and demand for the service that there is. And I think that training is really key to improving that situation as well, to both improving the way that the criminal justice system functions, which is currently woeful, and then in turn increasing people's confidence in the criminal justice system, because I don't think we can in good faith now focus on trying to increase confidence in the criminal justice system when we know how often it lets victims and survivors down. And don't get me wrong, when anyone comes to Sarsville and they're considering reporting to the police, we support them to make the decision that feels right for them. We're survivor-centred and empowering service, and that's completely the right thing to do. We hope we provide them with the space and the support, and also the accurate information to enable them to make that empowered decision, and then through the years of the service support them throughout that process if that's the thing they decide to pursue. But we don't advise, wouldn't advise anyway, but I think there's quite often, I'm going around in circles a bit, but I'm doubling back to what I wanted to say, which was I think we put a lot of pressure on women and girls to protect themselves, and a lot of public awareness raising campaigns and schemes have focused on that over the years, and it's got better. The messaging has definitely got better than it was 10-20 years ago, but ultimately that's not going to be the thing. Women and girls being fearful, having to curb our behaviors, having to think about things that men typically don't have to think about constantly, having to expend all this emotional and physical energy on our personal safety. That's not going to be the thing that really gets to the crux of, reduces and ends these forms of violence. It is absolutely education, and education aimed, first at everyone, because I completely agree that this is an issue for everyone and we need to be as inclusive as we can, but that encourages placing accountability and responsibility where it should lie, which is with perpetrators and potential perpetrators. And I couldn't agree more that includes proper widespread education about what consent is, because part of the issue with the criminal justice system is that even those within it don't apply the legal definition of consent, and we've had the current law on consent for a really long time, and it's not yet been embedded to the point, we see rape myths and myths around consent creep in even into the criminal justice system. And if people in general don't have a full understanding of what consent is, then people are going to perpetrate sexual violence without realizing it. B, people are going to experience sexual violence and be left with that horrific confusion and self-blame and shame, where we think, was it something that I did? This felt like a real violation, but was it? But also, if they are lucky enough to get to the end of the criminal justice process, jurors are ordinary people like you and me as well, who can carry those myths and that lack of understanding around consent into the courtroom. So yeah, sorry, that was a little bit circuitous, but we're generally just in agreement about the importance of education. And I think that, you know, there are big public awareness issues that the government has invested in centrally in the past. You probably won't remember, but there was a time when people used to drink drive all of the time. And there was a time before that when nobody wore a seatbelt. And both of those things had very significant amounts of money put into big awareness raising public campaigns, to the point where it just became second nature to challenge someone if you saw that they were going to try and get behind the wheel of their car after having a couple of drinks, or to tell someone to put their seatbelt on if they didn't have it on. So you know, it is absolutely possible to shift those kinds of cultures and attitudes, but it requires grassroots people and movements like us and ours, but also it requires absolute commitment from the very top of government and investment.
Yeah, no, exactly. I agree. I think in terms of like education and awareness, the issues that we have, the main, I guess, way to combat that is just to speak and just to participate and to, you know, take your own action wherever you can. I think in terms of like legal definitions, we all acknowledge that there are a lot of issues with legal definitions, with state actions, with, you know, certain representatives of the country, or, you know, famous people. Like everyone, there's issues everywhere and they're prevalent everywhere. And I think in terms of the fight against sexual violence and harassment, I've kind of always felt that whilst it is really great to have all of these welfare, like us and all of these welfare organizations, the real need is for prevention and mutual respect. And instead of, you know, focusing all of our resources solely on dealing with the consequences, just to prevent the issues before they happen would be amazing, would be ideal. And again, just to clarify, like Katie was saying, I don't mean prevention in the way of like, you know, women should carry a rape alarm, or women should not dress provocatively, or women should, you know, any of these victim blaming attitudes that we unfortunately still see in a lot of social media. I mean preventing attackers from having the means to attack, and holding each other accountable for sort of any behaviors that may lead to harassment or assault. And I know that that's something that Chloe, unfortunately she couldn't be here with us, founder of Sasha, she would have put a massive emphasis on as well. Victim blaming is sadly very prevalent, and I think that we really need to combat that as students especially. And as well, just to add on to what Katie was saying, I think you said not a lot of people realize that they actually are even experiencing sexual harassment or sexual violence. And something that Ellie Flynn said in that documentary was talking about blame and apologies. And I think it was women always sort of conditioning themselves, or being conditioned to apologize for things that aren't their fault, which I guess showcased a lot of internalized misogyny and sort of repression of trauma, which I think you, Niamh, at Survivors West Yorkshire deal with as well. So yeah, I think generally, ultimately, education reform is needed.
Yeah, I think it can feel quite defeating as like grassroots campaigners and organizations, because we feel, and we are doing so much, but really the issue does lie with the government and the criminal justice system. Like, they need to change. And I think what Katie was saying about kind of drink driving and stuff like that, and how that changed, and most of that was driven by kind of the threat to life, because people were losing their lives. And it's the same in this issue. Like, people are losing their lives because of the trauma and the experiences they've had, and that's prevalent across both for men and women. Like, we see so many people committing suicide because they're not getting the support and they're not being heard, and that is something that I think the government and the institutional systems, they need to recognize that this isn't just an issue of kind of violation, and as awful as those things are as well, like, this is life ending. It's just such a awful thing for someone to experience. So yeah, I completely agree with that.
Yeah, I just wanted to say about the criminal justice system as well. I think would say this as the welfare officer, but something which is really problematic about it is the lack of support through, if people do report to the police. I think these victims and survivors have already gone through something so traumatic, and then the actual process of the criminal justice system itself is so can be traumatizing then continuing from that. And so I think that if there was this better support and this sort of emotional support through the process, which of course these charities offer that as well, but even just rooted in the system itself, there should be this support for people going through that system, then more people might then report. And it's almost this sort of like cyclical thing. Everything is related, but it does come down to the systems, and these systems that make people feel unheard and can then become quite traumatizing themselves as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think I'm just conscious of time, so we've got just over 10 minutes. So I'd just like to give the opportunity if anyone wants to kind of put questions in the chat, and we could answer any questions. If not, if there's anything else that we haven't talked about yet that people found kind of interesting from the documentary, if any of you guys would like to bring anything else up, or we can just see if any questions pop through. Yeah.
I think something that we maybe didn't necessarily touch on from the documentary was the sexualization of schoolgirls and the harassment of women who wear school uniform. As Ellie said, it's the formative years of our lives. So I was just kind of like, as a question to Lauren and Katie and also to Niamh, do you think that we maybe act differently now because of what we've experienced? I think personally I do, and I wouldn't be working with Sasha obviously if I hadn't experienced that, which is a positive, but equally I'm very apprehensive. I think one of the men in the group at the end said that he feels that a lot of women behave differently towards him when they don't know him, just because of fear. Do you think that that's very prevalent in a lot of the conversations that you have?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point that we didn't touch on, and one of the really poignant things I thought Ellie said towards the end of the documentary was, I totally know that this isn't all men, but I don't know which men. And this is the point. Like, if you know, I don't know the statistics on sharks, for example, but I'm pretty sure that not every shark in the ocean has attacked a human being. And yet, if I saw a shark, like, I would definitely be swimming in the other direction. And this is the thing, I think, this is why documentaries like these and this notion of radical empathy, and I've talked a lot about empathy through my career as well, this encouraging particular boys and men to have empathy for girls and women, but of course people of all genders to be able to experience and show empathy for each other. I think this is what's absolutely key, because until people have empathy for what it's like to grow up a girl in the world and experience those really kind of go through those really formative experiences, it won't be taken seriously. It won't have that investment at government level that we've talked about. The criminal justice system won't be invested in and reformed in the ways that it needs to be. The investment in those support services and advocacy services won't be there. And the crucial investment in education that we've all been talking about won't be there. I remember being you know, harassed, catcalled, leered at from a really, really young age. And I, you know, and I've experienced different forms of sexual violence throughout my life. And of course, you know, some of those experiences probably have steered me towards this type of work. But I like to think that I would be here anyway, because it's a social injustice. It's a really glaring social injustice, and of course, this social injustice intersects with many others like racism and homophobia and transphobia and ableism and other you know, survivors who also experience those forms of oppression and discrimination can face even more barriers to justice and to support. You know, can be targeted in different ways. It can rightly, understandably fear sort of statutory services and the criminal justice system because of their past experiences. So I think absolutely, like, my experiences with men have affected my interactions with men going forward. But I think that it is, again, you know, men's responsibility really to understand why that is.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point to bring up, Liv. And I think that it's interesting what Katie said about the sharks, because it does come down to that actual survival instincts and you know, the fight, flight, freeze, form survival instincts that we have. And I think it's an interesting question in a way because there's different layers to it. For me particularly, there's that idea of it impacting the way that we maybe approach men. I think a lot of that is probably unconscious for me, myself, maybe, and even small things like, you know, I've changed my route home to avoid the pub crawl, things like that, which are daily activities, and that is you know, us changing our behaviors. And I think in a way that idea of that unconsciousness, it does come down to this desensitization from these issues, because in a way it's sort of seen as the norm, like the catcalling that is such a common occurrence. And I think I didn't realize at a young age that that was harassment, really, because it was just sort of seen as a normal, and you know, a lot of people have experienced it, so that the masses of it makes it feel I don't know, not acceptable isn't the word, but just it's normalized, and we are desensitized to it. But yeah, I think that reaction comes in so many layers, and a lot of it is unconscious for the victims and survivors.
Yeah, I think that it's such a great point to bring up with the uniforms in the documentary, when the girl just said, like, that marks you as someone who is a child, like it's the way to identify it. And they kind of touched on like the Halloween costumes of people dressing as schoolgirls. And recently I saw a clip of someone saying, why should I not dress as a schoolgirl if I can profit off like the if I'm going to profit off the male attention? And I was just like mind blown at that kind of approach. So it shows that the issue, like how embedded misogyny can be in women as well. And yeah, that really shocked me, how someone couldn't see how much of an issue it is to even dress as a schoolgirl and sexualize a child. It's just another issue that we need to combat. So yeah, it can feel very overwhelming, I think, working and being an activist in this sector, because like we've discussed such a huge range of topics and different areas that need to change in order to kind of get to a point where this isn't as a threat to women. But I think that this and things like this are very productive conversations, even with people that work within the sector, like hearing other people's perspectives on things. It helps you learn and grow as an activist as well. So we've got a few minutes left. I don't know if anyone's got any kind of final closing statements they'd like to make. I don't think anyone's popped any questions in, which is absolutely fine. But if no one has anything to say, unless anyone wants to jump in.
I was just going to say, we've touched on this already, but it is such a good point to make, that you can be an activist in such a multitude of ways. So even having a conversation with your partner or your child or whoever, that is activism. And I think Katie was saying this earlier, but by doing these things, we are not hopeless individuals. And I think this is, it's just such an important point to make, that if you do these things and just incorporate that into your day tomorrow, then you are making a difference. And
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. So yeah, I would just like to say thank you so much to you three for spending the time this evening and having a really productive chat and a hopeful chat, I like to think. You know, it feels like a big mountain to climb, but we're all here scrambling. But yeah, and it's been a really lovely evening chatting to you, and I hope that everyone in the audience has enjoyed tonight and has given them food for thought or some hope. And just thank you all for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much.
No problem.
Thank you as well for running it all. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh well, I'll say a final thank you as well to Rob for
Thank you, Rob.
just for Rob for organising this all and making it all possible. It's really great.
I think you're amazing. So the energy, and I'm sure Katie is energized by it, because we've been around this a long time, to know that you guys still have that energy that we still have, that we have to navigate all the systems. But, you know, it's amazing. Don't lose it. So look after yourselves, but don't lose it. Quite amazing. Thank you.